Look, I need to be completely honest with you from the very beginning. I have been teaching at the Koroth Military Academy for 17 cycles, and in all that time, I truly believed I had seen everything the galaxy could throw at a weapons instructor. Every species, every fighting technique, every strange cultural habit connected to warfare. That was what I thought, until the humans arrived. My name is Vorith, and I teach advanced blade crafting to the most promising young warriors coming from 12 star systems. The academy itself sits on a moon called Dos Prime, orbiting a gas giant so enormous that the sunrises look almost unreal, like something pulled from a fever dream. It is beautiful, dangerous, and brutally intense, which is exactly the kind of environment a place like this needs. The semester I am about to tell you about started just like any other. 63 students walked into my workshop on the first day. Their scales, fur, feathers, and other strange biological coverings glowed under the harsh forge lights. Most of the species were familiar to me. Collarth, of course, my own people, the founders who built the academy in the first place. Then there were the Vortax, creatures with 6 arms that make them terrifying opponents in close combat. A few Kelpri floated quietly in the air, strange gas-filled beings who somehow become brilliant strategists despite having no bones at all. And then, standing quietly in the far back corner of the room, looking unbelievably small beside everyone else, there was her, Miracle Kane, a human. Now I had heard about humans before. Everyone had. They had only been part of the Galactic Council for 3 cycles. Yet somehow they were already causing disturbances across half the galaxy. Loud disturbances. The kind that make admirals nervous and force politicians to quietly update their insurance contracts. But until that moment, I had never actually met one face to face. She could not have been more than 5.5 feet tall, which meant she barely reached chest level on most of my students. No natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, no electromagnetic organs. Nothing that any sensible warrior species would consider useful in battle. Just soft pink skin, brown hair tied back in a practical knot, and a pair of strange eyes that seemed to study everything around her without revealing a single thought. I remember thinking at that moment, this is going to be interesting. And when I say interesting, I mean a complete disaster waiting to happen. The first day of my class always follows the same pattern. I give the speech, the students pretend to listen, and then we finally begin working. The speech matters, though. It sets the tone for the entire course. I stood at the front of the workshop, my claws tapping sharply against the metal podium, and addressed the room. My voice echoed across the stone chamber, where the walls were decorated with weapons from hundreds of civilizations. Swords, axes, polearms, and even stranger weapons that most languages do not have names for. Welcome to advanced blade crafting, I said, spreading my mandibles into what most species recognize as a smile. A few students flinched at the sight. Good. Fear improves concentration. You are here because someone, somewhere, believes you possess potential. Whether that decision was correct or completely wrong, we will discover together. A few nervous laughs moved through the room. The human in the back did not laugh. She simply watched me with those quiet, unsettling eyes. In this course, I continue while pacing across the platform, you will learn the ancient art of weapon forging. Not just how to use a blade, but how to create one. You will learn its balance, its weight, its structure, its soul. Because yes, a truly great weapon has a soul. It becomes an extension of your body, your will, and your very identity. I pause there deliberately. I have always been very good at dramatic pauses. The final examination for this course is simple. I announced, each of you will forge your own blade from raw material to finished weapon. You may use any techniques you learn here, any cultural traditions you bring with you, or any innovations your mind can create. Then you will prove its effectiveness in combat. The room shifted with nervous energy. A Vortax student in the 3rd row began clicking her mandibles anxiously. Now, I said, slamming one claw against the podium hard enough to make the entire class jump, let's discuss materials. The holographic display behind me activated, projecting dozens of metals and alloys into the air as glowing blue shapes. Throughout history, I explained, warriors have used whatever their worlds could provide. Iron steel, titanium Durasteel, crystallized carbon lattices, plasma-fused alloys. The list goes on endlessly. I gestured toward the floating display. Here at this academy, you have access to our materials vault, one of the largest collections in known space. Samples from hundreds of worlds are stored there. Choose carefully, because the material you select will determine everything about how your blade performs. And that was the moment she raised her hand. The human girl lifted one small hand into the air politely, almost like she was asking permission to leave the room. I stopped speaking mid-sentence, genuinely confused. In 17 cycles of teaching, I could count on one claw the number of times a student had interrupted my opening lecture. Yes, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Sir, she replied calmly, far calmer than anyone should sound when surrounded by beings capable of tearing her apart in seconds. What if we want to use materials that are not in the vault? I blinked, all four of my eyes, one after another. I just explained, I said slowly, that the vault contains materials from hundreds of worlds. What exactly do you believe is missing? Oh, I do not think anything is missing, sir, she said with a small smile. And something about that smile made the scales on my neck itch. I was just wondering if we are allowed to use other things, if we find them. Other things, I repeated carefully. Yes, sir, other things. I stared at her for several long seconds, trying to determine whether this was some strange human humor that I simply did not understand. Eventually, I waved one claw dismissively. As long as your material can be forged into a functional blade, I do not care what you use. Students have tried extremely unconventional materials before. One Kelpie once created a sword from compressed gas. Completely useless in combat, but creative. She nodded slowly, that same strange smile still on her face. Thank you, sir. I should have recognized the warning signs in that moment. Truly, I should have. But hindsight is always clearer than foresight. The following weeks passed normally. Well, normally for a military academy where half the students can breathe fire and the rest have toxic blood. I taught them the fundamentals of metal energy flow, heat treatment, and edge geometry. The essential knowledge every bladesmith must understand. They took notes, asked questions, and practiced on scrap metal until their techniques improved from absolute garbage to merely terrible. Mira participated in everything. She was obviously not the strongest student. Her arms were laughably weak compared to even the smallest Collarth. But she paid attention. She listened carefully. And during demonstrations, she watched with an intensity that honestly made me uncomfortable. She also spent an unusual amount of time in the biological sciences wing. That was strange, because the biosciences building sat on the complete opposite side of campus from the Forge workshops. There was absolutely no reason for a blade crafting student to be there, yet I kept hearing reports from other instructors. Miracle Kane checking out books on xenobiology. Miracle Kane requesting access to anatomy laboratories. Miracle Kane asking very detailed questions about skeletal structures across different species. Eventually, I asked her about it one afternoon after class. She was cleaning her workstation, arranging every tool with almost military precision. Everything had a place. Everything was perfectly aligned. Miracle, I said, trying to sound casual, I hear you spend quite a lot of time in the biosciences wing. Yes, sir, she replied without even looking up. Mind telling me why? I asked. Research, sir. Research for what exactly? I pressed. This time she did look up, and there was that smile again. For my blade, sir. The moment she said that, one of my mandibles twitched involuntarily. Your blade is a weapons project. I replied slowly, not a biology experiment. She nodded calmly. I understand that, sir, but I prefer to understand exactly what I am working with. I tried to keep my patience. The materials vault contains full molecular analyses of every substance stored there. Whatever you choose from it, you will understand perfectly. She gave a polite nod again. I appreciate that, sir, but I am not planning to use anything from the vault. There it was. Confirmation. I crossed my upper arms across my thorax while the lower pair rested on my hips, a posture most students find intimidating. Mira simply kept smiling. You are aware, I said slowly, that the final examination requires a functional weapon. Not a research project. Not a biological curiosity. A blade that can actually survive combat. Yes, sir, she replied calmly. I am completely aware. I studied her carefully. And you are confident that whatever mysterious material you intend to use will meet those requirements? Extremely confident, sir. I wanted to press her further, demand an explanation, force her to reveal exactly what she was planning. But technically she had not violated a single rule. I had told the class they could use any material they wanted, as long as it could be forged into a working blade. And I pride myself on being a fair instructor. You set the rules, you follow them. So I simply grunted and walked away, convincing myself that whatever strange plan the human had would collapse the moment it reached the forge. She would fail the forging stage and eventually start again with something sensible. Spoiler alert, I was catastrophically wrong about that assumption. Weeks slowly turned into months. One by one, the other students finished their research and moved into the actual forging stage. The workshops filled with familiar sound of hammering metal, the hiss of superheated alloys plunging into cooling baths, and the occasional painful shout when someone burned themselves to spite wearing protective equipment. A Vortax student named Kelix forged an elegant curved blade from titanium alloy, designed with 6 separate grips, so she could wield it with any combination of her arms. A Collard named Thornick chose a traditional approach, folding steel again and again using techniques our species had perfected over thousands of cycles. Even the Kelpri student, whose name I still cannot pronounce without inflating 3 throat sacs, managed to create something moderately functional from hardened resin. Meanwhile, Mira still had not begun forging anything. She attended every lecture. She passed every test. She participated in every practical exercise. But her workstation remained completely empty. No materials, no tools laid out, no design sketches on her datapad. Nothing at all. Eventually, the other students began to notice. I heard whispers when they thought I was not paying attention. What is the human doing? She hasn't even chosen a material. Maybe humans don't actually know how to forge. I heard they're a primitive species. Maybe she doesn't even understand the assignment. That last comment came from Kelix, the Vortax student, and for reasons I cannot fully explain, it made me irrationally angry. Humans might be many things, but primitive was not one of them. A species does not go from discovering fire to faster-than-light travel in less than 10,000 cycles if they are primitive. By galactic standards, that is practically a speedrun. Still, I did not offend Mira. That was not my responsibility. My job was to teach blade crafting, and she was not crafting anything. 2 weeks before the final examination, I finally called her into my office. My office is a small room connected to a workshop, its walls covered with certificates, commendations, and photographs of former students proudly holding their completed blades. I sat behind my desk, a reinforced table large enough to support my bulk, and gestured for Mira to sit in a chair across from me. She sat down calmly, folded her hands in her lap, and waited. Mira, I began, trying to keep my voice neutral. The final examination is in 14 days. Yes, sir, I am aware. And you have not begun forging your blade. That is correct, sir. In fact, I continued, leaning forward slightly, you have not even shown me the material you intend to use. Also correct, sir. My claws scraped lightly against the table's surface as I leaned closer. Mira, I am going to be completely direct with you. If you do not present a functional blade in 14 days, you will fail this course. Failing this course means expulsion from the academy. Expulsion means returning home in disgrace after wasting an entire semester and a considerable amount of your government's funding. Do you understand how serious the situation is? I understand perfectly, sir. Then why? I said, my voice rising despite my effort to remain calm. Have you not started working? She looked at me silently for a moment, her expression completely unreadable. Then she reached into the bag she always carried and slowly pulled out an object wrapped in dark cloth. Because, sir, she said quietly, I have been working, just not here. She carefully unfolded the cloth, and the moment I saw what was inside, every scale along my body stiffened. It was bone, not just any bone, either, a long curved section of skeletal material, still polished with a faint sheen of something that had once been alive fairly recently. It was about 2 feet long, thick on one end and tapering naturally on the other, the curve suggesting it had belonged to something large and very dangerous. "What?" I said slowly, trying to process what I was seeing. "Is that?" "This," Mira said, gently running a finger along the bone as if it were something precious, "is the femur of a Krothac hunting beast. They're native to this moon. Those Prime actually has a hidden ecosystem in the lower valleys that most people don't even know about. Krothacs are apex predators, 10 feet tall at the shoulder, claws sharp enough to tear armored vehicles, and a bite force strong enough to crush Durasteel." She spoke about it almost fondly. "This particular one died about 6 months ago during a territorial fight with another Krothac. Natural causes, more or less. No hunting involved. When I found the body last week, it was still mostly intact. I stared at her, then at the bone, then back at her again. 'You have got to be joking,' I finally said. 'No, sir, I am quite serious.' 'Mira,' I said slowly, 'that is a bone. Bones are not weapons.' 'With respect, sir,' she replied calmly, 'bones have been used as weapons by dozens of species across galactic history, including my own. Some of humanity's earliest weapons were made from bone. We became rather skilled with them.' 'Yes,' I snapped, 'on your primitive home world thousands of cycles ago. This is an advanced military academy. We use modern materials.' 'You said I could use any material I wanted,' she replied calmly, though there was unmistakable steel in her voice now. 'As long as it could be forged into a functional blade. Those were your exact words. I even recorded the lecture, if you like confirmation.' I opened my mouth, then closed it again. My mandibles twitched in frustration. She was right. Completely, technically, infuriatingly right. 'Fine,' I finally said, because what else could I say? 'But bone is organic material. It is brittle. It will shatter under combat stress. Even if you manage to shape it into something resembling a blade, it will fail during the demonstration.' 'Maybe,' she said calmly. 'Or maybe I know something about bone that you don't. And what exactly would that be?' I asked, narrowing my eyes. She smiled again, but this time it was different. Not mysterious. Not unsettling. It was a smile of someone who knew they were holding every card in the game and was simply enjoying the moment before revealing them. 'That would be telling, sir,' she said lightly. 'And where would the fun be in that?' She stood, wrapped the bone carefully back inside the cloth, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at me. 14 days, sir. I'll have a functional blade. I promise.' Then she was gone, and I was left sitting alone in my office, wondering what in the name of all the stars I had just allowed to happen. The next 2 weeks were pure agony. Mira attended every class like clockwork, but she never worked in the main workshop again. Instead, she requested access to one of the private forging rooms, the small isolated chambers usually reserved for students handling dangerous or unstable materials. I approved the request. Technically, she had broken no rules, and honestly, I was morbidly curious to see what kind of disaster she was about to produce. The other students quickly noticed her absence from the main workshop. The whispers grew louder every day. 'I heard the human is using bone. That's insane. She's definitely going to fail. Do humans not understand metallurgy?' I didn't correct them. Let them think whatever they wanted. In 14 days, we would all find out the truth together. Meanwhile, I still had the rest of my class to evaluate. Kellix presented her 6-grip titanium blade, and it was genuinely impressive. Thornick's folded steel sword was nothing short of art, the layered metal forming patterns that looked like flowing water. Even a Kelpie student managed to produce a resin blade that didn't poison anyone on contact, which honestly exceeded my expectations. But through every presentation, every critique, every grade I assigned, my mind kept drifting back to that human girl and her ridiculous piece of bone. The day before the final examination, Mira submitted her official request to present her weapon. It arrived to the Academy's formal system, perfectly formatted and accompanied by all required documentation. Every form completed correctly, every detail precise. She had dotted every I and crossed every T, or whatever the human equivalent of that phrase is. The final examination took place in the Academy's combat arena. It was a massive circular structure with reinforced walls, multiple observation platforms, and a floor capable of shifting into different terrain configurations. For blade evaluations, however, we kept things simple. Flat ground, no obstacles. Just a student, their weapon, and a sequence of targets designed to test every aspect of a blade's performance. The stands filled quickly. Other instructors arrived. Students from different courses crowded the viewing platforms. A few officers from the Korra Defense Force came to scout potential recruits. Even several civilians showed up after hearing rumors that a human student had joined the academy and wanted to witness the spectacle. I stood inside the instructor's observation box, which overlooked the entire arena floor, and called the first student forward. One by one, they stepped into the arena. One by one, they demonstrated their blades, cutting through synthetic flesh targets, pairing against training drones, proving balance, durability, and edge retention. Some students passed with ease. Others barely scraped through. 2 failed outright when their blades shattered under stress. Then finally, I reached the last name on my list. Mira, human, please enter the arena. The crowd fell silent. Even the background chatter disappeared. Everyone wanted to see this. She stepped onto the arena floor from the preparation tunnel. And that was the moment I saw what she had created. Holy stars above. It was beautiful. The bone had been shaped, carved, and polished until it gleamed beneath the arena lights like liquid moonlight. The natural curve of the femur had been refined into a wicked forward arc that practically screamed danger. The thicker end had been wrapped in a textured grip material, while the narrow end tapered into a razor point so fine it seemed to vanish into the air itself. The entire blade was engraved with intricate patterns, lines and symbols that might have been human writing or perhaps decoration. I couldn't tell from where I stood. It was roughly 30 inches long. It looked utterly lethal, and it was made entirely from bone. Mira stood calmly in the center of the arena, holding the weapon loosely in one hand. Then she looked up toward the instructor's box. "Instructor Vorith," she called, her voice echoing clearly across the arena. I present my blade for examination. Only then did I realize my mandibles were hanging open. I snapped them shut with an audible click. "Proceed with the demonstration," I said, trying to sound composed. She nodded and turned toward the first target. And that was when things became truly interesting. The first target was standard synthetic flesh, essentially a mannequin filled with gel designed to mimic the density of organic tissue. We use it to test cutting efficiency. A good blade slices through cleanly. A mediocre blade drags and tears. A poor blade either bounces off or gets stuck entirely. Mira approached the target with surprising grace. For someone so small and seemingly fragile, she moved like a predator, every step deliberate, every muscle controlled. She didn't swing wildly. No dramatic spins. No flashy flourishes. She simply adjusted her stance and struck. The bone blade passed through the synthetic flesh as if the target didn't exist. One smooth diagonal cut from shoulder to hip. The dummy separated instantly and collapsed onto the arena floor in 2 perfectly clean halves. The crowd murmured. Behind me, someone whispered, "Did that just happen?" Yes, it did. But one clean cut proves very little. Synthetic flesh is relatively easy to slice if a blade has even a halfway decent edge. The real tests come afterward. "Proceed to target 2, I announced. Target 2 was metal, a 6-inch column of soft aluminum alloy. This test measures cutting power and edge retention. Most student blades can cut it, but the amount of effort required reveals the blade's true quality." Mira shifted her grip slightly, stepped into position, and swung. The bone blade entered the metal with a sound like singing crystal. She drew the weapon through the column, and the metal separated with a flawless cross-section that gleamed under the arena lights. No jagged edges, no deformation, just a smooth, perfect cut. And when she withdrew the blade, I could see the edge clearly. Not a single chip, not a single roll. The bone had sliced through metal without leaving a mark on itself. That should not have been possible. It was completely, fundamentally impossible. Bone is organic, calcium-based. Its hardness rating is far below most metals. It should have shattered, or at the very least dulled, upon striking that aluminum. Yet Mira's blade looked exactly the same as it had before the strike. What did she do to it? Someone whispered behind me. I turned and saw Professor Hellren from the Advanced Materials Department. All three of her eyes were wide open, something a Collarth only does when genuinely shocked. I have no idea, I admitted quietly. Bone should not cut like that. It's not physically possible, she said, unless she treated it with some kind of hardening process. But what kind of process could alter the molecular structure of organic material? I muttered, without destroying completely? I suppose, I said slowly, turning back toward the arena. We are about to find out, because Mira was already moving toward Target 3. Target 3 is where most students begin to struggle. A 2-inch plate of Durasteel, suspended between two support pillars. Durasteel, the same alloy we use for starship hulls. Durasteel is incredibly strong, incredibly resistant to cutting, and incredibly expensive. We only keep a single plate for testing, and it has to be replaced every few semesters because students inevitably damage it during exams. The goal of the test is not to cut through it. That would be impossible for most hand-forged blades. The real challenge is to see how deep a mark the blade can make. Anything over a 1/4 inch is considered excellent. Most students barely reach 1/8 of an inch even when their blade is well made, and they put all their strength into the strike. Mira studied the plate quietly for a long moment. Then she did something that made every scale on my body stiffen again. She lifted her hand and slowly ran her thumb along the sharpened edge of her bone blade, dragging across the edge as if she were casually testing it. A thin line of red appeared instantly on her skin. Blood. Is she insane? Kellex hissed from somewhere in the stands. Why would she cut herself right before a strength test? But I understood. Perfectly. And against my better judgment, it made me respect the human even more. She was making a point. She was showing everyone in that arena that her blade was so sharp it could cut her own flesh without pressure, that the edge wasn't just good, it was perfect. Then she turned toward the Durasteel plate, adjusted her stance once more, and swung with every ounce of strength in her small human body. The impact rang through the arena like a struck bell. The sound echoed across the walls, sharp, clear, and strangely beautiful in its violence. Mira stepped back, and I activated the measurement scanners to determine the depth of the strike. The result appeared instantly on the arena display. 1.75 inches. For a moment, the entire arena went silent. 1 3/4 inches into Durasteel, with a blade made of bone, wielded by a human who probably weighed less than most people's luggage. That wasn't just excellent. That was record-breaking. That was better than some military-grade manufactured weapons. How? Professor Hellren whispered behind me, her voice barely audible. How is that possible? I immediately activated the analysis protocols. The scanners began examining Mira's blade and streaming molecular data onto my display. I read the results once, then twice, then a third time, because what I was seeing made absolutely no sense. The bone had been treated several times in several different ways. Chemical baths, heat cycles, pressure treatments. But it wasn't the treatments themselves that made the blade extraordinary. It was how she applied them. Bone isn't uniform. It contains multiple structural layers. The outer cortical layer is dense and extremely hard. The inner trabecular structure is porous and flexible. Anyone trying to turn bone into a weapon would normally treat the entire structure the same way and hope it held together. Mira hadn't done that. Through what must have been weeks of painstaking experimentation, she had treated each layer differently. She hardened the cortical surface until its durability rivaled certain ceramic composites. She compressed the trabecular interior, removing weak points while preserving just enough flexibility to prevent the blade from shattering on impact. And then she had done something else. Something far more complicated. Some kind of polymer infusion process that altered the molecular structure itself. The result was a hybrid material, part organic, part synthetic, and entirely lethal. This wasn't simple weapon forging anymore. This was materials engineering at a level that would make most doctoral research programs jealous. The human Professor Helrin said slowly beside me, appears to have reinvented metallurgy, using biology. Yeah, I replied quietly. That's exactly what she did. But the test wasn't finished yet. One final challenge remained, the one that makes most students nervous. Live combat demonstration. Miracle Kane, I announced, my voice echoing across the arena. You have passed the cutting and strength evaluations with exceptional marks. Now we proceed to practical combat application. You will face a training drone equipped with standard defensive protocols and armed with a regulation practice blade. You must demonstrate that your weapon can be used effectively in real combat conditions. Do you understand? Yes, sir, she replied. Her voice sounded confident, maybe even slightly excited. I signaled the drone technician. One of the training drones rolled into the arena. These machines are designed specifically for combat testing. Roughly humanoid in shape, about 7 feet tall, with articulated limbs and advanced combat programming capable of fighting at several difficulty levels. For student exams, we normally set them to intermediate difficulty, challenging enough to be meaningful but not impossible. I set the drone to intermediate and activated it. The machine hummed to life. Its optical sensors glowed blue as it scanned Mira and calculated her threat level. Then it drew its practice blade, a dense polymer training sword, and moved into a fighting stance. Mira rolled her shoulders slightly, adjusted her grip on the bone blade, and waited. The drone attacked first. It always does. The programming forces it to initiate combat in order to test the student's defensive reactions. The polymer blade swung down in a brutal overhead strike that would have shattered bones if it connected. Mira sidestepped casually. The blade slammed into the arena floor with a loud metallic clang. Before the drone could recover, she was already inside its reach. She moved like water, like smoke, like something that didn't obey the physical limits that should restrain a creature her size. The bone blade flashed once, twice, 3 times. 3 clean cuts across the drone's torso. Each strike deep enough that, if this had been a living opponent, they would have been bleeding out on the floor. The drone systems registered the hits instantly and switched to aggressive mode. It began attacking faster. Combination strikes, feints, angle cuts designed to overwhelm even experienced fighters. Mira blocked, parried, redirected. Every movement was efficient, precise, brutally effective, and the bone blade held perfectly. Every impact against the drone's polymer sword, every clash, every moment of stress. The blade didn't chip. It didn't crack. It didn't show the slightest weakness. She wasn't just surviving the combat test. She was dominating it. The drone attempted a low sweeping strike. Mira leapt over it and brought the bone blade down onto the drone's shoulder joint in a precise downward cut that would have severed an arm on a biological opponent. The drone registered critical damage and immediately began its shutdown sequence. Mira stepped back, breathing slightly heavier but far from exhausted, and lowered her blade into a resting position. The drone powered down and collapsed onto the arena floor. For several seconds, the arena remained completely silent. Then someone began clapping, slowly at first. Then others joined, and suddenly the entire arena erupted in applause, cheers, whistles, and whatever sound of approval each species could produce. I looked again at the data on my display, the molecular scans, the performance metrics, the combat effectiveness rating. This ridiculous bone blade, which should not exist, which violated several basic principles of metallurgy, which had come from the skeleton of an animal that died in a random territorial fight, was one of the best weapons I had seen in 17 cycles of teaching. I activated my communicator and spoke directly to Mira's audio implant. Miracle Kane, please approach the instructor box. She walked across the arena floor, still holding the blade, and looked up at me. The crowd quieted, curious about what would happen next. I should have simply passed her, congratulated her, moved on to final grading. But I am an instructor, and instructors are, by nature, curious creatures who cannot ignore mystery. Mira, I said loudly so the entire arena could hear, I need you to answer one question for me. She waited. Why bone? I asked, with access to every advanced alloy and composite in our materials vault, why did you choose bone? She smiled up at me. This time there was no mystery in it, just simple amusement. Because, sir, she said, everyone else was going to use the materials in the vault. They were going to make perfectly good, perfectly conventional blades using perfectly established techniques. She paused for a moment. And that's fine. That's what you taught us to do, she said. But humans, well, we have this habit. Maybe it's an instinct. When everyone else goes high-tech, sometimes we go back to basics. When everyone else grabs the newest and shiniest tool, we look at what nature already gave us and ask how we can make it better. She raised the bone blade slightly so the arena lights reflected off its polished surface. My ancestors made weapons from bone when they were barely even sapient, she continued. They broke apart animal skeletons and used the pieces to hunt, to fight, to survive. Those weapons were crude, simple, nothing compared to what we can make now. But the idea behind them was solid. Bone is strong. Bone is flexible. And wherever life exists, bone exists too. She paused for a moment before continuing. So I thought, what if I took that ancient idea and combined it with everything I've learned at this academy? What if I stopped thinking of bone as primitive and started treating it like a real engineering material with unique advantages? The arena was silent as she looked around at the crowd. And it turns out I was right. Bone has a structure metal simply can't copy. Evolution designed it to absorb impacts without shattering, to flex without breaking, to survive stress for decades. She gave a small shrug. I couldn't make it heal, obviously, but I could improve everything else. Make it harder, sharper, stronger. She held the blade up again. And the result is a weapon just as effective as anything made from the materials in your vault. But it's also something else. It's unique. It's mine. It tells a story about where I come from and what my species values. Then she lowered the blade and looked directly at me with those strange human eyes. You told us our blade should become an extension of ourselves, sir. Something that reflects who we are. This is mine. This is human. We take what others throw away, what others ignore, and we turn it into something dangerous. The crowd exploded again, even louder than before. I saw Professor Helrin quietly dabbing her eye clusters with a cloth, which is what collars do when they're emotionally moved. Even Kellix, who had mocked the idea earlier, was now making approving gestures with all 6 of her arms. I looked down at Miracle Kane, this small human who had somehow walked into my classroom and taught an entire military academy a lesson about innovation. And for the first time in many cycles, I felt something unexpected, pride, not in myself, in a student. Miracle Kane, I said formally, my voice carrying across the arena. You have not only passed this examination, you have exceeded every expectation I had. Your blade demonstrates mastery of materials science, engineering design, and combat application. Your performance today will be recorded in the Academy archives as an example of exceptional work. I paused briefly before adding something more personal. And thank you for reminding this old instructor that sometimes the best solutions are not found in high-tech vaults, but in looking at old problems with new eyes. She grinned at that, actually grinned, showing those blunt little human teeth. Thank you, sir. So does this mean I passed? You passed with highest honors. You're ridiculous human, I said. Now get off my arena floor before I change my mind. She laughed and jogged toward the exit tunnel, holding the bone blade high while the crowd continued cheering. Later that evening, after the grades were finalized and the students had either gone out to celebrate or quietly mourn their failures, I sat alone in my office writing the semester report. Normally those reports are painfully dull. Student lists, grade statistics, notes about curriculum effectiveness. But this time I added a special section at the end. Recommendation for future curriculum development. Instructors should consider expanding acceptable material choices beyond the Academy Vault inventory. Students should be encouraged to explore unconventional materials and methods, as these may lead to innovations in weapon development. See Student ID 7731K, Kane for an example of a successful unconventional approach. I sent the report to the Academy administration and leaned back in my chair, my carapace creaking slightly with the movement. The thing I was beginning to understand about humans wasn't that they were the strongest species, or the fastest, or the most technologically advanced. Plenty of civilizations surpassed them in those categories. The strange thing about humans was the way they looked at the universe. Where others saw waste, humans saw potential. Where others saw limits, humans saw possibilities. They could take something as ordinary as a piece of bone and turn it into a weapon capable of rivaling military alloys. And they did with a smile, as if the entire process were obvious. I had a feeling the galaxy would be dealing with human surprises for a very long time. My communicator chimed. An incoming message from the Academy Commandant. Instructor Vorith. The message read, I have reviewed your semester report, particularly the section about the human student and her bone blade. You should know that the Galactic Military Council has already contacted us requesting permission to study the weapon. Word of today's demonstration appears to have spread very quickly. The message continued. They want to know whether bone treatment techniques could be useful for low-resource military operations. Instructor, what exactly have you started here? I thought about that for a moment, about Miracle Kane and her ridiculous, brilliant, impossible blade, about how one human had walked into my classroom and shattered half my assumptions about engineering. Then I typed my reply. I taught a class, sir. The student did the rest. The commandant responded a few minutes later. Well, the student has apparently started what our analysts are calling a materials revolution. Engineering firms, military contractors, research institutes. Everyone wants information about what that human did. Entire species are now reconsidering biological materials for weapons design. I smiled at that, probably in a way that would terrify anyone walking past my office. Good. I typed back. Maybe it's time someone shook things up. 3 days later, I was back in my workshop, preparing for the next semester. New students would arrive soon. New ideas. New projects. The cycle would begin again, as it always had. But this time, I made one small change in my opening speech. Welcome to Advanced Blade Crafting. I would say, you are here because someone, somewhere, believes you have potential. In this course, you will learn the ancient art of weapon forging. You will create your own blade from raw material to finish weapon using any techniques, traditions, or innovations you can imagine. Then I would add one new line. You have access to our materials vault, which contains samples from hundreds of worlds. But you also have access to an entire universe of materials that most people never even consider. I would pause there before continuing. Last semester, one student made a blade from bone. It was one of the finest weapons I have ever seen. So don't limit yourselves to obvious choices. Look around. Think creatively. Find something that reflects who you are and where you come from, and then make it deadly. I leaned against my workbench and looked at the empty stations that would soon be filled with eager students. For the first time in many cycles, I felt excited about the coming semester, because if one human with a piece of bone could surprise me that much, what might 63 new students create? Only time would tell, but I had a feeling it would be interesting. And by interesting, I mean completely chaotic in the best possible way. Somewhere on campus, in her dormitory, Miracle Kane was probably already planning her next impossible project, looking at something everyone else ignored and figuring out how to turn it into something extraordinary. That seems to be what humans do. They take the discarded, the ancient, the overlooked, they sharpen it into a blade, and then they challenge the galaxy to keep up.